I was betrayed by my own friends and publicly humiliated. But one day I completely turned the tables. I never thought I'd experience something like this in my life. I've always considered myself a good person, willing to help, to be there, to be the one who holds the fort when others need it. But I never imagined it would backfire and leave me in a position of shame, anger, and even fear. I remember one day in particular that has remained etched in my memory as a turning point. It was a Wednesday, lunchtime in the company cafeteria, and it felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I'd already been suffering from gossip, indirect comments, and whispers as I walked by. The weight of being labeled stingy was suffocating me, especially because I knew the truth. I'd spent a lot of money, much more than I should have, on a party that was supposed to be a happy one, and yet they were painting me as selfish. It was there, in that environment full of dirty looks, that I realized I had to fight back or be destroyed forever. My name is Eliane. I'm 36 years old, and that day I felt a mixture of shame and despair that nearly paralyzed me. I was tired, exhausted from trying to please everyone, and at the same time terrified of opening my mouth and being attacked even more. You know when you feel your face burning with nerves, as if everyone is judging you, even though no one has said anything yet? That's how I felt. My heart racing, my hands sweating, my voice catching in my throat. But I had one thing with me that gave me a shred of courage: all the receipts. I kept every bill, every receipt of what I spent at the party. Not because I planned to defend myself, but because I've always been organized and don't throw away that kind of stuff. And in that moment, it felt like those papers were my only escape, the only proof that I wasn't lying. Carolina, Vivian, and Priscilla were sitting together, as always, laughing and talking loudly, making sure everyone heard. They'd already spread the word that I was irresponsible, that I didn't know how to organize myself, that I'd let everyone down when it came to splitting the bills. I listened and swallowed hard, but inside it was like being hit after hit. It's hard to explain the pain of being betrayed by those you thought were friends. I'd made a point of being there for their birthdays, had spent money on gifts, transportation, even food, which I often brought from home to add to the celebrations. And on my day, instead of gratitude, came pressure, humiliation, and then gossip. I felt used, disposable, like I was just an idiot they controlled for their own benefit. I wouldn't have been able to stand up in that cafeteria if it weren't for two people, Claudia and Raphael. They weren't my close friends before, but they were the only ones who saw my pain without me having to speak. The day before, they took me aside and said, "Eliane, you can't leave this like this. You have proof, show it. No one deserves to go through what you're going through." Those words stuck in my head, like a push to keep me quiet. Deep down, I was terrified of exposing myself, of becoming the target of ridicule, or of seeming like I was begging for respect. But when the time came, I realized that staying silent was only giving more strength to their lies. I took a deep breath and decided to stand up. When I stood up, it seemed like the entire noise in the cafeteria had disappeared. Suddenly, everyone was looking at me, and panic nearly made me give up. I was shaking so hard I had to hold on to the edge of the table. But I pulled the envelope with all the receipts from my bag and placed it on the table. My voice cracked, but I said, "I want everyone to see who really paid for what." I started to point them out one by one. Cake, decorations, party favors, restaurant. Over 1,200 rees from my own pocket. People fell silent, some visibly surprised. Carolina tried to, laugh it off, saying it didn't prove anything. But I looked straight ahead and replied, "It does prove it. It proves you lied and used me." It was like a huge weight had been lifted off me, even though my legs were still wobbly. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt like I'd torn away a veil that had been suffocating me for weeks. But along with this relief came a searing fear. I knew that from then on, I was going to pick a fight. Carolina's look was one of pure hatred, and Vivian began, whispering in her ear, trying to hide her surprise. Priscilla, as always, sat on the fence, pretending she had nothing to do with it. But I knew, deep down, that she had participated too, because she always put on that conciliatory air, just to avoid seeming as cruel as the others, but silently supported everything. It felt like being in a courtroom, with everyone judging me, and me having to fight to prove I wasn't a criminal. I was simply tired of being treated like an idiot. At that moment, I thought I was going to collapse because my whole body was shaking and it felt like I was going to faint right there. But then I saw something that gave me strength. The look in Claudia and Raphael's eyes. They were a little further back, but they were looking at me with that Go for it. You can do it. Look. And it was as if that kept me going. I kept talking, saying I had no problem helping, that I'd always enjoyed contributing, but that I no longer accepted being used. I said that every penny I'd spent had been with love, but that I wouldn't tolerate being called irresponsible and stingy after having paid for practically everything. I felt my voice grow firmer with each sentence, as if I were suddenly taking back a part of myself that had been lost. The reaction of those around me was a shock to me. Some began to whisper, but this time it wasn't gossip against me. It was comments of surprise, of disapproval of what they had done. I saw colleagues who had never been involved in this kind of thing shaking their heads, as if to say, that was too much. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. I no longer carried that invisible weight on my shoulders, as if I were guilty of something I never did. It was strange, because at the same time as I felt angry at them, I also felt an enormous sadness at realizing how wrong I had been. I truly believed those women were my friends. When I sat back down, my hands were still shaking, but it was a different kind. It wasn't from fear anymore, it was from adrenaline. I knew I'd done the right thing, even if it had consequences. I'd never been one for confrontation. I'd always preferred to avoid fights, to swallow my own horn, because I believed it was better that way. But that day, I realized that swallowing too much horn drowns you. I needed to break free from that cycle. And there, even without knowing it yet, I'd taken the first step toward changing not only the way others saw me, but especially the way I saw myself. I wasn't weak. I wasn't a fool. I had value. After that, the mood in the cafeteria changed completely. The three of them stood there speechless for a few seconds, trying to compose themselves. But it was too late. Everyone had already seen it, already understood who was lying and who was being wronged. They got up and almost ran away, and for the first time I felt the mask slip. It wasn't a fireworks victory. It wasn't a beautiful movie moment. It was heavy. It was tense. It was painful. But it was real. And in that moment, even with my heart racing, I felt a new peace. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I just needed to move on and never let anyone treat me that way again. For the rest of that workday, I could barely concentrate. It felt like I'd been emotionally beaten. While I felt a certain relief, I was also exhausted, with a heavy head. Every time I walked down the hall and saw someone looking at me, I couldn't tell if they were judging or supporting me. It was strange, because some colleagues came up to me discreetly, telling me I'd been brave, that it wasn't easy to face a situation like that. I was grateful, but inside I still felt a little broken, as if it had taken me a long time to realize the cruelty of the people I called friends. This weight of disappointment was even worse than the gossip. When I got home that day, I broke down. I sat on the couch and cried until I couldn't hold back. It wasn't just because of the party or the money. It was because I'd given too much of myself, believed too much, and suddenly it all seemed in vain. I remembered every detail of the party, how I'd stayed up late decorating, choosing the cake, thinking about every detail to please everyone. All of this now only reminded me of how much I'd been used. It was as if my generosity had been thrown away, and this feeling of being an idiot gnawed at me. I wondered if I was too stupid, if I'd never learned to stand up for myself. But between one cry and another, a different thought also came to mind. I realized that if I could face those women in the cafeteria, in front of everyone, then I had more strength than I imagined. Maybe I'd spent my whole life thinking I needed to please others to be accepted, and that was precisely what had gotten me into this situation. But there, after everything, I understood that I didn't need to. I could be respected without having to sacrifice myself all the time. This clarity hurt, but it also brought a sense of liberation, as if I'd finally removed a blindfold. That night, I barely slept, but my mind was racing. I kept remembering Claudia and Raphael's words. It was so important to have someone remind me that I had proof, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't making anything up. I began to see that maybe there were people who truly saw me for who I was, and not just what they could get out of me. That difference made everything start to change. It wasn't overnight, but in that moment, I began to decide that I would never again allow myself to be treated like the good girl who pays for everything. The next day, the atmosphere was already different. It wasn't as if everyone had become my friends, but there was respect. Carolina and the others began walking with their heads down, even avoiding passing me in the hallways. I wasn't seeking revenge. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I just wanted my name cleared, my peace back. And I got it. But more than that, I gained something I'd never truly had. The certainty that I could defend myself. For the first time, I wasn't just carrying pain, I was also carrying strength. And this strength would guide me to things I couldn't even imagine at the time. A few months later, I began to realize something incredible. After that confusion, some people from the company started reaching out to me, not to gossip, but to ask for help. Andrea, from another department, was the first. She told me she'd seen my work at the party and that I had an incredible talent for organizing events. At first, I was surprised because I'd never considered taking this business further. But her compliment lit a light I didn't even know existed within me. For the first time, I felt my skills were not just appreciated, but truly valued. It was strange to realize that the same event that caused me so much humiliation also opened doors for me. I began receiving invitations to organize small parties, birthdays, corporate events. Each opportunity reminded me of how hard I had worked, how much I had taken care of every detail without expecting anything in return. Only this time it was different. I was being recognized for my work, not just exploited. This recognition brought me pride, and with it, a sense of independence I had never felt before. When I decided to create Luz and Festa Eventos, it wasn't out of revenge. It wasn't to show anyone anything. It was because I finally felt I had the right to earn from my efforts, to be respected and valued. I still remember the early struggles, suspicious clients, suppliers who didn't believe in me, sleepless nights planning every detail. But the fear of failure no longer outweighed the desire to prove to myself that I could. Each successfully executed event gave me more confidence, and more than that, more pride in myself. Looking back on that day in the cafeteria still gives me chills. I remember the racing heart, the sweating hands, the fear of exposing myself. But I also remember the sense of power that came with it, the clarity that I could set limits. It was a turning point. I learned that generosity doesn't mean being exploited, and that it's possible to be kind and still be firm. This lesson was hard, but necessary. It shaped not only my career, but the way I deal with people today. Today, when I see my clients smiling at the end of a party, or when I receive compliments on a job well done, I remember how it all began. It wasn't easy. Nothing was easy. But that courage to stand up, show the receipts, and face the situation changed my life. I still bear the scars of that day, but I also carry a strength I didn't have before. I learned that saying no isn't selfish, that asserting yourself isn't mean, and that being used by others only ends when you decide to set limits. And that, as painful as it was, brought me freedom. Over time, my business began to truly grow. It didn't happen overnight. Each achievement came after hard work, many hours of planning, negotiating, and organizing. But with each contract closed, each satisfied client, I felt like I was building something solid, something no one could take away from me. The pain of that day in the cafeteria still surfaced occasionally, in fleeting memories, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer shame or fear, but motivation. Every challenge I face today reminds me that if I could face those women and that moment of humiliation, I can face anything. I learned to value people who truly deserve my trust. Today, I don't let myself get caught up in false friendships. I'm selective, yes, and that's not arrogance, it's emotional survival. Before, I thought I needed to please everyone, that I needed to be available all the time, but I discovered that my energy has value. This lesson was painful, but liberating. I discovered that generosity is only true when it doesn't destroy you, that it's possible to be kind and still be firm. And most importantly, I learned that my voice matters, that my effort deserves recognition, and that no one can silence me. What strikes me most today is realizing how such a negative situation can turn into something positive. I could have kept quiet, swallowed it all, continued suffering in silence, but I didn't. I decided to fight back, show my truth, and set boundaries. And that changed everything. My confidence, my work, my life. I realized that those moments of pain and humiliation taught me strength, courage, and self-respect. Every time I look back, I thank myself for not giving up, for not letting myself be crushed by the lies and malice of others. Today, when I organize a party, I'm not just decorating tables or choosing colors. I'm building dreams, but I'm also showing myself that I'm capable of transforming pain into strength. Every event that passes through my hands reinforces that that day in the cafeteria was not in vain. It taught me that boundaries are essential, that trust is earned, and that respect begins within. I still feel remnants of fear or insecurity sometimes, but they no longer paralyze me. They simply remind me that I survived, that I grew, and that I continue to move forward. I know I'll never forget that day, but I also know it no longer defines me. I define who I am now, someone who learned to assert themselves, who learned to value themselves, and who turned humiliation into victory. Luz and Festa. Eventos is more than a business. It's living proof that it's possible to free yourself from those who only seek to exploit you. That pain can transform into motivation, and that the courage to stand up for yourself opens paths you never imagined existed. Today, I sleep with a clear conscience, proud of what I've built, and with the hope of continuing to grow, learn, and be happy without depending on anyone's approval.